Hello everyone. It's been quite a while since my last upload. If you guys are wondering where I've been, basically I went through a process a while back where I had to move houses and I went through a legal name change. I won't go further into detail about my personal life, but for anyone wondering, that's pretty much it. Today I'd like to discuss a new topic about Red Dead Redemption 2. And that is how I personally think the game should be played, at least according to my subjective experience. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about major spoilers throughout the whole video. So if by any chance, if you still haven't played this game yet, now is the time to click off the video. But make sure to come back. Firstly, let's try to understand the story of Red Dead Redemption 2. So, Arthur and the gang he rides with are consistently facing the ever-growing risk of being either caught or killed by local law enforcement or the Pinkerton Detective Agency. In terms of character flaws, Arthur doesn't stand out that much from the rest of the gang. He's the third most influential gang member besides Hosea and obviously Dutch. Being third most influential isn't a title earned with smarts or peace-loving attitude. It's earned with contribution, loyalty, and cracking skulls. Arthur essentially plays the role of the enforcer. He's there for every skirmish and relied upon as one of the best gunmen in the gang. You may be wondering where I'm going with this, and well, many people, myself included, for the first couple playthroughs of the game, have this habit of making Arthur as nice, likable, and good karma as possible. After all, we have this idea that he's supposed to be the hero of the story, and even though he eventually does become a hero by the end, we're forgetting that he isn't exactly a good person. We find this out from listening to various dialogue throughout the game, insofar as Arthur calls himself a bad person, struggling with that belief. Or it's implied or directly told to him by his fellow gang members if you make good decisions too early in the game, belittling you for getting soft. Point is, Arthur was a relentless bastard of a man whose sole purpose in life was being the committed goon he was to Dutch and his gang that he swore by as his family. This segues into my next point. The duality of man. Some can argue the game lets us make our own choices regardless of the direction the narrative is going in, and that proves the blank slate of Arthur. Therefore, if you choose good karma options, it doesn't break his character. I would rebuke this argument by reminding those of the actual context of the game. If Arthur was a good person, would he beat Mr. Downs to death? Would he mentally incapacitate Tommy? Would a kind-hearted Arthur truly go around robbing innocent passengers at gunpoint during train or homestead robberies as seen, for example, in Chapter 2? Obviously not. These are all non-player controlled plot sequences of the game that you're forced to witness. So let's not be delusional here and say that just because you choose good for Arthur, it makes him a good person by default. As we have established so far, Arthur only cares for the well-being of the gang and himself. If anything gets between him or the gang, it's fair game concerning his morality. That's why during my playthrough, which I consider to be more pragmatic, I choose to kill the O'Driscoll that ambushes us in the barn at the beginning of Chapter 1, as well as to kill Jimmy Brooks on the cliff's edge. Why? Because they're getting in the way. Because Jimmy Brooks knows us from Blackwater. There would be no way Arthur leaves a loose end at this point in the game. Going back to the first Red Dead Redemption when we first meet the strange man, if we convince the drunk man not to cheat on his wife, the strange man will inquire of John about it, stating how ironic it is for a cold-blooded killer to have moral standards when it comes to the sanctity of marriage. He's pointing out the hypocrisy. Anyway, back to Arthur Morgan. I find it quite narratively poetic how the thing that causes Arthur to change his morals is tuberculosis, contracted from the very man he beat to death. Arthur never wanted to change into a better person at any point in his life had it not been for this and other factors. In fact, to make my point even further, cut content for this game suggests that Arthur was likely going to be an even more cutthroat individual than the final product. There are cut voice lines where Arthur apparently hunts down the man who killed his wife and kid. Let's talk about Arthur's mental state during all this. He lost the only people he cared about before Dutch in the game became his new family. When Micah pissed the Blackwater job, we understandably see Arthur start being harsh toward him considering the amount of jeopardy he put the gang in. When John Marston ditched the gang, Arthur was harsh with him too. John ditching the gang left it at a vulnerable juncture from which recovery was difficult, and even though that made John a worse person in Arthur's eyes for it, John was still considered family. Initially, Arthur is bitter and doesn't forgive John, but gradually, as Arthur began seeing the immorality of the deeds of the gang, he gained respect for John and reconciled his differences with him, admitting this time that ditching the gang is the right thing to do. When it came to family, John was the rule, not the exception. And even though Arthur was once mad at John for leaving selfishly, he himself would have never left John behind. But what about the actual choices you should make in the game? We previously mentioned two of them, the O'Driscoll and Jimmy Brooks. I want to reiterate that the choices I think players should make canonically as Arthur are context dependent, and that context is the person of Arthur. Kieran Duffy, and O'Driscoll gets captured by Arthur. When it comes to the choice you're given here, it makes sense to Arthur's character and his love for the gang that he'd spare him. Why? Because he proves to Arthur at this point in the story that he's not a direct threat to him. Unfortunately, Kieran gets killed before he can truly prove himself trustworthy to the gang, however. It's clear Arthur felt for him. The next choice we have is Mary Linton. Now, this is a huge one, and quite possibly one of the more controversial choices in the game. Because if you choose to help Mary, you can get more context about Arthur's life with her. It's very easy to be persuaded to help Mary, because when she's first introduced to us, we see her as a sort of damsel in distress who only Arthur is capable of helping. However, if you pay attention to the dialogue of the missions with her, it becomes clear that this is not the first time Mary has asked Arthur for help. We discover a depressing reality that despite how much Arthur does for her, she never romantically returns to Arthur, and this clearly has always been a problem for him. It's a one-sided sort of relationship that Arthur needs to move past. So the choice I believe is the correct one here is to reject helping her. Mary is a vestige of Arthur's old life, and one that he chose to leave behind when he swore himself an outlaw. By helping her, you're essentially helping Arthur get tangled up in raw emotions he'd rather forget and distracting him from his focus. By denying her request, Arthur stays in focus and committed to his duty. It's a huge threat to get involved with her because it causes him to become emotionally vulnerable, and that could compromise his ability to stay respected in the gang. Yes, it's true that rekindling his relationship with her would reignite a fraction of the love he felt for her, but ultimately it would bind him into a loveless relationship from which he would have to escape again. Mary's requests involve helping her with her family, such as rescuing her brother from a cult and dealing with her father's gambling debts. In reality, these are the type of problems Arthur canonically should be ignoring. He's already sacrificed enough for her as it is to let bygones be bygones. Deep down, Arthur knows that he's on borrowed time, that his life as an outlaw cannot lead to a happy or peaceful outcome. Helping Mary might give him brief hope he could settle down, but considering what he's been through, it's doubtful. Denying her request logically means avoids false hopes and dreams. It might seem like I've encouraged players to make Arthur into some sort of piece of shit. But let's finally discuss Arthur's transition to good person and how to make it so that it isn't so jarring. The obvious turning point for me, and, well, as many others would have to be, is when Arthur finds out he has tuberculosis after he returns from Gorma. By this stage in his life, he's not only been through a lot, but he's done a lot that actually makes him question his morals. This being after Bronte is killed, which even made John question Dutch's sanity by feeding Bronte to alligators. This being after Arthur overheard Bronte calling out Dutch for being a manipulative person and making sense. This being after Dutch lied to Arthur about knowing Spanish and killing an innocent woman after she outlived her usefulness to him. This being after Micah's misdeeds led to the group being in more trouble with the authorities. These realizations came together over time to prove Arthur that it's pretty much over and that Arthur is his own worst enemy. After the tuberculosis, he started seeing things clearly the way that they are, because he no longer had any presumption to stay loyal to Dutch and the gang, knowing he'd die sooner than expected. He finally saw that there was no future for the gang anyway, hence his reconciliation with John and the other good ones, because they were the only family he had left. After the diagnosis, it's possible to achieve high honor if you assist the priest. These two missions are only available until after Arthur is diagnosed, and they give a ton of honor and favor. I can't help but think that perhaps this was done intentionally by Rockstar. Not long after, you run into Chief Eagleflies outside the Saint Denis courthouse, where he's petitioning the government about local issues with his tribe. It's as if these missions were designed back to back by the grace of Providence to help Arthur transition into a better person. Afterwards, we see Mrs. Downs again in Annesburg. Unlike with Mary Linton, helping Mrs. Downs rescue her son from the mines no longer contradicts Arthur's goals, as this is an opportunity for selflessness, a kind that doesn't require Arthur to be wound up in a life that he's forgotten and thus keeping him in a perpetual dead end. Charlotte Belfour can be encountered next, and she's a helpless widow you find in the woods north of Annesburg. She's grieving her recently deceased husband and is all alone. Helping her means to help her learn how to hunt with firearms and survive on her own. In this circumstance, Arthur feels for Charlotte because it makes him reminisce his own wife being taken from him. We can assume that he uses this opportunity to make up for lost time spent not paying attention to his own wife when he had her. In Chapter 6, you're given the opportunity to help out Sadie Adler. Sadie asks Arthur if she'd accompany her to finish off the O'Driscolls at Hanging Dog Ranch. I believe in this instance you should ignore her. Arthur tells Sadie that the O'Driscolls are finished anyway without Colm leading. He tells her that he just doesn't have it in him anymore to do such a thing anyway. He's clearly trying to give up killing people and hunting down rival gangs. Before Colm was hanged, Arthur didn't find it wise to assist in his death, but he went along with it anyways because Dutch said so. It's a personal philosophy of Arthur's that revenge is a fool's errand. He would be marking himself as a hypocrite by not only helping her due to his own progress and character, but partaking in a vengeful quest for her sake and encouraging her to take revenge for someone who is also trying to be better. It makes sense that by this point in the game, he would want her out of it, because he finally understands what this can lead to. Even though not helping her gives you low honor, it's the morally correct choice to make. Where we once denied Mary Linton for not wanting to bring up the past, we must also deny Sadie. Lastly, we come to the decision: take the money or help John. Conversely, I would advise to go back for the money. Morally speaking, this doesn't really matter, for the money can be considered as the last nail in the coffin for what is left of the Vanderlyn gang. The money is all they had left, and Arthur going back for it means he was going to use it to assist John and his family once they escaped. I find this ending poetic in a sense that it's the same gold crate we find at Micah's hideout on Mount Hagen. The money Arthur fought for at the end of Chapter 6, coming full circle into the end of the epilogue. Another reason why I'd go back for it is because if you return for the money with high honor, you not only get to kick Micah's ass in the end of Chapter 6, but you also get to leave a permanent scar by cutting his eye out with your knife. He symbolically stabs you in the back, and Arthur dies in one last attempt at defiance of the immoral people he once served. I also think what Arthur says to Dutch after going back for the money is a stronger message. Maybe Rockstar did this because they wanted to subvert expectations just like Grand Theft Auto 4. Though I genuinely believe it doesn't matter because both options are moral choices.
Stop this. Just stop this. Both of you fools.
He's turned, Dutch. I told you, he's turned. He came back here to rob you.
I didn't turn, Micah. You did. Tell Dutch what you said to Agent Melton.
Shut your mouth. You're talking nonsense.
You're the rat, Micah. I'm Molly, Dutch. Him.
You're dying, Black Lung.
Yeah, you're dead. Inside, you're dead.
Come on, Dutch. Let's get the money and get out of here. Dutch. Let's go. It's nonsense. Of course it is.
I still, however, feel as though taking the money is a better redemption arc. Even though Micah stands in Arthur's way, knowing he's weak and dying, Arthur pushes through and defends himself well enough, proving that his convictions to become a better person are real enough to take a fall for someone in bloody combat. With that being the end, I felt as though I should say, I made this video to explain how I believe Arthur should naturally and canonically play what choices he has to make as to provide a consistent experience. I want to prove to myself and people who make the same mistake that there is a correct way to play this game, despite instincts saying that you should want Arthur to be righteous from the get-go and thinking he's a blank slate when he's not. People playing this game see the honor meter and conclude automatically a certain direction needs to be pushed for some kind of reward, which mitigates the reality that Arthur falls on both sides of the morality spectrum. I personally do believe that this is how Rockstar designed the game to be played. I think despite Rockstar's best intentions, it's just better to follow through with how Arthur is supposed to act contextually, rather than creating cognitive dissonance for yourself, because I feel as though Rockstar designed this story a certain way, but still allowed for gameplay decisions anyway, for better or worse. As always, if you enjoyed my personal take and want to see me talk more about interesting topics surrounding the game, be sure to subscribe and like the video as it encourages me to keep going. See you in the next one.